The last cheerful photo arrived at 7:14 p.m. Two identical little faces pressed to a ferry window, cheeks glowing with excitement, while their father's caption promised, "All good. Back Sunday." After that, the world seemed to swallow them whole. Ethan Hale had never looked dangerous in the way people imagine. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless in public. He was the kind of man who kept receipts, who corrected spelling in text messages, who spoke about fairness the way other people spoke about love. But the custody dispute had turned him into someone brittle. For months, his conversations with his ex-wife, Laura, had been reduced to clipped handoffs and court-scheduled politeness. Every exchange carried an invisible audience, lawyers, reports, the judge's future opinion. Their twin daughters, Sophie and Lily, were 6 years old, two bright, quicksilver shadows with matching ponytails and different laughs. Sophie giggled like she was trying not to. Lily laughed like she didn't care who heard. That Friday afternoon, Laura stood in the doorway of her apartment building and watched Ethan buckle them into the back seat of his car. The air smelled like rain on warm pavement. The girls waved too enthusiastically, little wrists snapping back and forth, and Laura forced herself to wave like this was normal. Like it was just a weekend. Ethan promised the same things he always did: pancakes, a movie night, early bedtime. He even smiled, tight, practiced, and told Laura she'd have them back by Sunday at 6. His car pulled away. Laura stayed outside a moment longer than she needed to, listening to the hum of traffic and the faint echo of her daughter's voices fading down the street. The first evening went exactly as expected. Ethan texted updates. A picture of the girls in oversized life jackets at a marina. A blurry shot of a plate of fries with two small hands reaching in. He wrote, "They're happy. Don't worry." And then, later, "We decided on a little trip. Just a change of scenery." Laura stared at that message until the screen dimmed. A little trip wasn't part of the agreement. The court order wasn't complicated. Weekend visits meant their city, their routines, their return. She called him. It rang until it stopped. She tried again. This time he answered, voice calm, almost soothing. "Laura," he said, as if she were the one overreacting. "It's fine. They're with me." "Where are you?" "Driving," he said. "We'll talk later." "The girls are singing." In the background, she heard it, two small voices, high and careless, as if the world had no edges. Laura swallowed, trying to keep her tone steady. "Ethan. You bring them back Sunday." "Of course," he said. "I said I would." But something about the pause before "of course" felt like a door closing. By Saturday morning, his messages became more sparse, more controlled. A single line, "Crossed the border. No big deal." Then another, hours later, "Ferry tonight. Fun for them." Laura's hands shook as she sat at her kitchen table. She opened her laptop, pulled up maps, started guessing routes. The legal language in her head, custodial interference, violation, emergency motion, collided with the ordinary terror of a mother imagining her children in unfamiliar places, sleeping in strange rooms, trusting the wrong certainty. By Saturday afternoon, Ethan's phone went straight to voicemail. And in the quiet that followed, Laura realized she wasn't just waiting for her daughters to come home. She was waiting to find out whether Ethan had ever intended to return them at all. By the time Sunday morning arrived, Laura no longer slept. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her hand, watching the clock change numbers as if each minute might bring him back. 6 o'clock came and went. 7. 8. The silence pressed in, thick and deliberate. At 8:42 a.m., she called the police. At first, the response was measured, procedural. Officers asked questions in careful tones. Was Ethan ever late before? Had he threatened to leave the country? Did he have family elsewhere? Laura answered each one, her voice growing tighter with every sentence. No, no, no. He was rigid about rules, until now. When they finally labeled it what it was, a parental abduction, the tone shifted. Within hours, Ethan's movements began to surface, not as a clear path, but as fragments. A border crossing late Friday night. His passport scanned. 2 children listed with him. A gas station receipt from early Saturday morning. A cash withdrawal, large, far more than a weekend required. Laura sat with an investigator as the pieces appeared on a shared screen. Each new detail felt like proof and betrayal at once. Ethan hadn't panicked. He hadn't improvised. He had planned. Security footage from a ferry terminal showed him holding Sophie's hand while Lily trailed behind, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Ethan looked calm, almost relieved, as if movement itself soothed him. He bought tickets in cash. One way. The overnight ferry became a focal point. A floating pause in time. Passenger manifests listed all 3 names. A cabin booking. Witnesses remembered seeing the twins running along the corridor in socks, laughing too loudly, while Ethan followed, correcting them gently, firmly. He sent one final message during the crossing. "They're asleep. I'll explain everything soon." It was the last message Laura would ever receive from him. The next ferry, the one that left the following morning, told a different story. Ethan boarded alone. No one could say where the girls went. There were no sightings of them disembarking. No footage of them leaving the terminal. No reports from staff. Just a quiet absence, wide enough to swallow every explanation. From that point on, Ethan moved like a man shedding weight. He traveled light. Another border. Another withdrawal. Hotels paid in cash. He avoided cameras when he could, kept his head down when he couldn't. The route zigzagged, irrational, as if he were trying to outrun something that traveled inside him. Then the letters began to arrive. They were postmarked days before his death, sent to addresses that suggested intention: his sister, an old friend, a former colleague. Laura received a copy later, through investigators. The words were neat, controlled, and wrong in a way she couldn't immediately name. "I couldn't let them be taken from me," one line read. Another, "Some things are kinder than living with fear." There were no names. No places. No clear admission. Just enough ambiguity to feel like a confession whispered through clenched teeth. Police searched ports, forests, coastlines. They traced ferries, interviewed crew, reviewed hours of grainy footage. Dogs were brought in. Boats scanned the water. Nothing surfaced. No clothing. No belongings. No trace that Sophie and Lily had ever left that ferry, or stayed on it. Days later, Ethan stepped in front of a train. The investigation would call it the end of his journey. For Laura, it was the moment everything stopped moving, except the question that refused to rest. If he was alone at the end, then where, exactly, had her daughters gone? Ethan's death closed one chapter and tore open another. Without him, the investigation lost its only living witness. What remained were timelines, receipts, and the echo of children's laughter that existed now only in memory. Authorities rebuilt his final days minute by minute, turning movement into meaning, hoping repetition might reveal what intent concealed. They focused first on the hours between the 2 ferry crossings. The overnight ferry had docked just after dawn. Passengers disembarked in a steady stream: tourists, commuters, truck drivers. Cameras caught Ethan exiting the terminal alone. He wore the same jacket as the night before. He carried the same backpack. There was no sign of Sophie or Lily. Investigators considered every possibility. Had the girls remained on board? No, crew confirmed all passengers were cleared. Had someone else taken them? No reports, no alerts, no footage suggesting an exchange or struggle. The theory that refused to go away was the simplest and the most unbearable. Whatever happened, happened quietly. Search teams returned to the ferry itself. Cabins were examined. Railings inspected. Storage areas searched. Nothing. Water around the route was scanned again and again, sonar sweeping the depths like blind hands reaching into darkness. The sea offered no answers. Ethan's digital footprint told a darker story. On his laptop, investigators found searches conducted weeks before the trip, phrases that stopped them cold. How long it takes to lose awareness in cold water. Ferry schedules. One-way travel. Methods of disappearing without witnesses. Each search alone meant little. Together, they formed a shape no one wanted to name. Bank records showed withdrawals large enough to suggest preparation, yet that money was never recovered. No hotel safe. No deposit box. No trace. It was as if it had dissolved along with the rest of him. Laura read the summaries in a small, windowless room at the police station. She listened as detectives spoke carefully, avoiding final words. Likely. Believed. Probable. She nodded, took notes, asked questions that kept her upright. But inside, she rejected their conclusion with every breath. There were no bodies. No proof. No moment she could point to and say, "This is where my daughters stopped existing." Without that certainty, hope, thin and painful, refused to die. She replayed memories instead. Sophie insisting on tying her shoes alone. Lily falling asleep mid-sentence. The way they used to switch places to confuse their teachers, laughing afterward as if they'd pulled off something daring. Children like that did not simply vanish. Someone would have seen them. Someone would remember. As weeks turned into months, tips trickled in. A pair of girls spotted at a train station. Twins seen with a man who looked nervous. Each lead sparked frantic activity, then collapsed under scrutiny. The girls were always just out of frame, just a little older, just not quite right. The case grew quieter. Files thickened. Press interest faded. But Laura did not move on. She learned the language of missing children. She met others who lived suspended between loss and hope, parents who understood how silence could be louder than grief. Together, they shared stories, flyers, strategies, ways to survive the waiting. At night, Laura imagined the ferry again. The narrow corridors. The low hum of engines. She pictured Ethan sitting on a bunk, the girls asleep beside him, the sea stretching endlessly outside a small round window. She wondered what choice he made when no one was watching. And whether Sophie and Lily were still somewhere in the world, growing taller, forgetting her face, or waiting, just as she was, to be found. Time did not heal the case. It hardened it. By the second year, the investigation existed mostly on paper, binders of reports, timelines pinned to boards, digital folders labeled and relabeled as theories shifted. New detectives rotated in, studied the files, and reached the same quiet conclusion before passing it along unchanged. The hours between the ferries remained the center of gravity. Investigators reconstructed them again, slower this time, almost reverently. They mapped the ferry deck inch by inch. Wind direction. Water temperature. Visibility at dawn. They spoke to crew members who had worked that route for decades. None remembered anything unusual. No raised voices. No alarms. No children crying in the night. Which, in its own way, was the most unsettling detail of all. Ethan's letters were analyzed word by word. Linguists debated intent. Psychologists debated mindset. One sentence, repeated across drafts found on his computer, drew particular attention: "I chose what I thought would hurt them the least." To investigators, it sounded like resolve. To Laura, it sounded like fear masquerading as certainty. She refused to let the case fade quietly. Laura began speaking publicly, carefully at first, then with growing confidence. She learned how to hold her voice steady during interviews, how to describe Sophie and Lily without breaking, how to say their names like they were still present, not past tense. She founded a small organization for families of missing children, starting with borrowed office space and a donated printer. Flyers went out. Social media pages followed. She answered messages at all hours, from strangers who swore they had seen the twins, from parents newly thrust into the same endless waiting. Late at night, when the world was silent, doubt crept in. Laura would replay the investigators' conclusions, the clinical phrasing, the careful distance. Most probable. Highly likely. She hated those words. They felt like a slow erasure, like permission for the world to forget. And yet, she could not fully escape the image of Ethan alone on the second ferry. The absence beside him was too complete. Too deliberate. What if the truth was exactly where everyone thought it was, hidden in plain sight, beneath the sound of water and engines, sealed away by the vastness of the sea? The thought made her chest tighten until breathing felt like work. Still, there were details that refused to align. The missing money. The erratic travel afterward. If his journey had already reached its end point, why continue moving? Why cross borders alone, withdrawing cash that would never be used? Why write letters that explained everything and nothing at once? One investigator admitted, quietly, that they believed Ethan had wanted to be understood. That the letters were an attempt to control the narrative, to be seen as tragic rather than monstrous. Laura rejected that idea outright. He wanted control, she said. But not understanding. If he wanted that, he would have told us where they were. Years passed. The twins' faces aged in digital renderings, longer hair, sharper features, eyes that still looked unmistakably the same. Those images haunted Laura more than the originals. They represented a future paused, a question stretched across time. Every birthday, Laura lit 2 candles. She spoke to them as if they could hear her, wherever they were. She told them about the seasons changing, about the people who still asked about them, about how they were not forgotten. And in the quiet moments, when hope and grief became impossible to separate, Laura made herself one promise. As long as there was no proof, Sophie and Lily were still missing. Not gone. Missing. A decade passed without answers, but the case never fully slept. Every few years, something small stirred it awake, a new tip, a re-examination order, a documentary producer asking the same careful questions. Each time, Laura felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the cautious lift of hope she no longer trusted. One lead arrived quietly, through an email sent late at night. A dock worker, retired now, claimed he had seen Ethan on the overnight ferry standing alone near the outer deck, long after most passengers had gone to their cabins. The man couldn't swear to the time. Couldn't swear to details. But he remembered the posture, rigid, forward-leaning, and the way Ethan kept looking down, not out. The statement changed nothing legally. But it shifted something emotional. Investigators returned once more to the idea that whatever happened did not involve chaos. There had been no panic. No sudden movement. If the girls had been harmed, it had likely been done with a terrible calm, during hours when the ferry was quiet and the sea endless and indifferent. Laura read the updated report alone at home. She closed the file and sat in silence, listening to the hum of her refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. Ordinary life continued with brutal persistence. People went to work. Children grew up. Seasons repeated themselves without regard for unfinished stories. She wondered if Ethan had felt that indifference too, if that was what finally drove him to step into the path of a train. Not guilt, not fear, but the realization that the world would keep moving no matter what he had done. Public opinion had hardened over the years. Online discussions were less careful now, less restrained. Most people spoke of the twins in the past tense. Most accepted the official conclusion. Laura did not. She answered messages from young adults who had once been missing children themselves. She spoke at conferences. She helped parents navigate the first days of not knowing, how to talk to police, how to preserve memories, how to survive the nights. Sometimes she dreamed of Sophie and Lily. In the dreams, they were always just out of reach, walking ahead of her through crowds, turning corners too quickly, calling her name from behind closed doors. She never saw their faces clearly. She always woke before they could turn around. On the anniversary of Ethan's death, Laura visited the station where it had happened. She stood at a distance, watching trains pass, feeling the wind rush through her coat. She did not come for him. She came for herself, for closure she knew she might never receive. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly, words carried away by noise. "But I won't let you be the end of their story." As years stretched on, the case became a question mark carved into official records. Presumed. Believed. Unconfirmed. The twins remained listed as missing, their names still active, their faces still circulating. And somewhere between certainty and denial, Laura continued to live, holding space for two little girls who had once waved from a car window, trusting that they would be back by Sunday. They never were. But as long as no one could say exactly what happened during those silent hours at sea, the truth remained unfinished. Waiting. In the end, the case did not close with a revelation. It closed the way some stories do, with exhaustion, with unanswered questions filed neatly away, with a truth that could be suggested but never proven. The official conclusion remained unchanged. Ethan Hale was believed to have ended his daughters' lives during the journey, most likely in the narrow window between the two ferry crossings. No location. No method confirmed. No final certainty. Just belief. For Laura, belief was not enough. She kept Sophie and Lily's room exactly as it had been for years. The bed stayed made. The drawing stayed taped to the wall. Sometimes visitors mistook it for denial. Laura didn't correct them. It wasn't denial, it was resistance. A refusal to let ambiguity turn into erasure. When people asked her what she thought really happened, she answered honestly. "I don't know," she said. "And neither does anyone else." That sentence became her shield. It protected her from conclusions that felt too clean for something so wrong. It allowed space for hope, not the naive kind, but the stubborn, disciplined kind that survived alongside grief. Every so often, a message arrived from someone who looked twice at a pair of grown twins on a train, or in a cafe, or walking down a street somewhere far away. Laura followed every lead, even when experience told her not to expect anything. She thanked people for remembering. For looking. As the twins would have reached adulthood, Laura imagined them as they might be, arguing, laughing, forming separate lives. She wondered which one would have called her more often. Which one would have rolled her eyes the hardest. Those futures lived only in her mind, but they mattered. They were proof that Sophie and Lily were more than a theory. On the anniversary of their disappearance, Laura returned to the water near the ferry route. She did not look at the surface for answers. She looked at the horizon, where the line between sea and sky blurred into uncertainty. She spoke their names out loud. The wind carried them away, but not into silence. The case files would always say missing. The investigations would always circle the same conclusion. The world would keep moving, indifferent and relentless. But stories have a way of resisting endings. Somewhere between evidence and absence, between belief and doubt, the truth of what happened during Ethan's final journey remained suspended, unfinished, unresolved, and haunting. And as long as that question remained unanswered, Sophie and Lily were not just a tragedy. They were a mystery still waiting for the moment someone, somewhere, finally saw what everyone else had missed.